Welcome to Green is Good, raising awareness of each individual's impact on the environment and helping to create a more beautiful and sustainable world. Now, here's John Shigarian, Chairman and CEO of Electronic Recyclers International, and Mike Brady.
Welcome to Green is Good, and Mike, it's great to be back here in studio with you again today.
Boy, I tell you what, the time is just flying by, John. I don't know what has happened to the summer, but here we are ready for another hour to entertain, inform, and empower our listeners.
Well, today's another great show. We've got Steve Christman from Indiana on talking about what solid waste districts are doing now, and we've got John Yipma and Rob Hunt on the second half of the show talking about Initiative Foods, which are one of the largest makers of organic baby food in America. So we've got another great show, Mike.
I'm looking forward to it, John. So we'll get started straight away, right after this, on Green is Good.
If a little green is good, more is even better. Now, back to Green is Good with John Shigarian and Mike Brady.
Welcome back to Green is Good, and we're so honored today to have on the line with us Steve Christman. He's the Executive Director of the Northeast Indiana Solid Waste Management District. Welcome to Green is Good, Steve Christman.
Thanks, John. It's good to be here.
You know, Steve, you have an amazing biography, 30 years in the field of environmental science, which is really just truly amazing compared to where most people are right now, just starting in the green revolution. Can you share a little bit with our listeners before we get into asking you about what you do exactly on a day-to-day basis? Can you share your journey? How did you ever get to where you are today as the Executive Director of the Northeast Indiana Solid Waste Management District?
Hearing you say 30 years reminds me that I'm getting old, John, but that's all right. It started out back in the 70s, and I was able to earn an undergrad degree from our Boilermakers here in Indiana, Purdue University. I had a family that loved the outdoors, and my dad had instilled in me the love for environmental protection. He was an outdoorsman, a hunter, and a trapper, and taught me a lot about the respect that we needed for our environment. So that got me started off to school to get a degree. Got out of Purdue, had an opportunity to go to grad school, but as a lot of folks out there might relate to it, I fell in love and ended up getting married. And, life takes off from there. And from that point, over the years I've operated a landfill, materials recovery facility, was asked by one of the local units of government, this would have been back in the 80s, to set up some environmental programs. So I was able to do that from scratch, which was a challenge, but a great opportunity. And since that time, of course, we've gotten involved with professional organizations like the Solid Waste Association of North America, or SWANA as we call it.
Right.
And I've had the privilege to serve on the international board, which allows me to learn from and work with my counterparts from all over North America, which is quite a treat. So I've been on a hazmat team, we call it, hazardous materials, back in the early 80s as part of emergency response. I was one of those guys in zoot suits, we called them back then, even back before they had air conditioning and all those things in these totally encapsulated suits. So, I'd worked with wastewater treatment plants, cleaned up things like zinc cyanide.
Oh, boy.
Those types of things. So it's suddenly been, as I look back, pretty interesting, very educational. I was part of that 1970s environmental movement, John, that some of the folks that are old enough in their 40s and 50s might remember. When we landed on the moon, we were able to get some really great pictures of the Earth coming back.
Right.
And some of that spawned this concern for the environment, coupled with tragic environmental effects or happenings such as the Santa Barbara oil spill, for example.
Right.
I believe it was in '69. The Cuyahoga River fire over my area outside of Cleveland. Those kind of things started that first Earth Day in 1970. So going green has been evolving, since then. So I've been real privileged. I've worked for state regulatory agencies, environmental consulting firms, operated a variety of solid waste facilities that, to make a long story short, landed me here at the Northeast Indiana Solid Waste District, which is a regional or multi-county local unit of government that's charged by the state to reduce the municipal solid waste stream. And so we have waste reduction programs, if you will, or strategies like recycling.
Right.
Composting is another one, for example.
Right.
And it was born out of a very real concern for dwindling landfill space back in the early 1990s. So these programs are helping, and it's all across America and North America, not just in the Midwest, of course.
Right.
Well, no, California leads the way in a lot of those areas. Many of us in the industry now, and many folks that we serve, that's part of this green movement, John, are beginning to recognize and realize that indeed trash or solid waste management really is resource management. And that's part of the good news I wanted to give everybody listening today is it's no longer carry and bury the trash and that type of thing. It's resource management. So I'm a student of environmental science, will be all my life. And so it's kind of exciting to see some of these new and changing things, especially now that you're old enough to look back and see some of the trends and that type of thing.
You know, Steve, when you got, this is why we wanted to have you on, and we're so honored to have you today because you're in great company here. We had the founders of the NRDC on, John and Patricia Adams, and they explained to our audience how literally they sat at a kitchen table 40-somewhat years ago and started the NRDC, and you're in the same position. You've got a wonderful visibility on where we've been and where we're going. Can you just start with the simple, what does a solid waste district do? And in terms of landfill rates, I know the EPA publishes rates right now, Steve, that somewhere around 54% gets buried, 33% gets recycled, 13% gets incinerated, and they say those numbers are changing over the next 10 years. Can you share a little bit with our listeners, as you just said, in terms of where we've gone from carry and bury to resource management, where the recycling rates can go with great people like you leading the way?
Sure, be glad to. It really is pretty amazing. There's a number of different trends that's occurring. The EPA, of course, tracks generation rates, we call it.
Right.
And so you can refer to those numbers and watch the percent of final disposal, the percent that's being recovered and recycled. It has fluctuated and changed a little bit. Of course, the economy and the condition of the economy directly affects the generation of solid waste.
Right.
So, as you might imagine, since about 2008, our volumes have dropped off quite a bit. So, as much as 20% in some places, especially here in the Midwest.
Wow.
Lots of changes coming on. The trend over the past few years has been larger, more regional landfills rather than years ago, especially here in the Midwest, which I'm most familiar with.
Right.
Each county had a final disposal facility. That trend has drastically changed. The number of landfills in a given state over the past 20 years has greatly dropped off, while the number of transfer stations, we call them, has greatly increased. A transfer station is a facility where the garbage trucks that you see on the street simply come in and drop off their load, and it's reloaded into a larger, typically a semi-trailer that goes then of the longer distance to the regional landfill. So distances have increased. The number of times we handle the material has increased. The final disposal facilities have grown greatly and are very large. Part of that is due to what we in the industry call the implementation of Subtitle D regulations under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA as we call it.
Right.
So some of those regs are the driver in this as well. What the trend that's happening now is final disposal, as we call it, landfills, from a cost standpoint, is, as you might imagine, getting more and more expensive. Well over $100 on the East Coast. In the cheapest areas typically still are here around in the Midwest or upper Midwest, around anywhere from $20 to $30 per ton. So, but because of those changes, John, other technologies over the past few years have kicked in, like recycling, for example,
right,
and composting.
Great.
The exciting news is, especially with regard to composting, and I know you're familiar with this being out in California, is food waste composting.
Yeah.
And here's the good news. This is why there's great things coming, and we can continue to recover more resources rather than landfill. And it's because we're learning that we can capture those organics, we call them, out of the waste stream, compost it, and make soil, which we desperately need.
That's wonderful.
So one of the latest trends is a good example, and that is food waste, for example, is going to help us to greatly achieve those goals of zero waste. You've probably heard that term as well.
Sure.
So you'll see more and more of that coming. Typically, it's much more prevalent on the east or west coast than it is here in the Midwest, but we're slowly catching up. We have a lot of rural recycling programs as well as some curbside programs here in my area. We compost as well, yard waste, currently. And many operations are looking at food waste, although there's some regulatory work to do here in Indiana to make that happen. So the trends are increasing recovery as well as more organics, more composting. Another trend, another term you'll hear is waste conversion technologies, where we can extract energy from our waste. One of the exciting things that's happening is, you've probably heard the term cellulosic ethanol.
Yes.
There are some technologies out there now that will allow facilities to make ethanol from cellulosic materials, like all our wood byproducts, for example. Here in the Midwest, corn stover can be, which is the corn stalks and everything left in the field after the corn is picked.
Okay.
As well as hay and straw and those types of things. But most importantly, and there's a facility that's going to be built here in Indiana that will be able to make ethanol from municipal solid waste.
Wow.
And that's exciting stuff, because we can make our own energy from what used to be a waste product.
You know, Steve, that's really exciting, because when you mention ethanol products, I know there was the big rush. Everybody just couldn't wait to invest in corn futures, thinking, okay, now that's a renewable fuel source. But it's good to know that it's the corn, what did you call it, the stowage?
Corn stover?
Stover, okay, which is the corn stalks. And so, you know, when people started thinking about it and thinking it through, the price of corn did go up, but so did the cost of food, for feed, for livestock. So it's good to know that we can eat the corn and get the same ethanol, basically, out of the corn stalks. I mean, that is great news.
It really is. It really is. There's some really exciting things happening in the wonderful world of municipal solid waste management, as I call it. So, and creating our own energy is one of those things. The industry also has focused quite a bit of resource towards landfill gas recovery.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
Well, and then there's other landfill gas experts out there other than I certainly don't consider myself one. But very simply put, when municipal solid waste decomposes in a landfill initially, it will create methane gas. Part of the Subtitle D regulations require that gas to be captured. Many firms now are capturing that gas, firing generators with it, and making electricity, because it's considered a renewable resource, rather than let that methane escape into the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas, by the way.
Right.
Depending on what literature you read, 21 or 23 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So that gas is captured and recovered and used as energy, and that's a good thing, especially with these large regional landfills that already exist. Let's take advantage of that resource that's there, rather than vent it to...
Steve, when you capture the energy from the waste and create a new resource out of it, whether it's on the ethanol or the gas, where does that energy go? Who buys it and then repurposes it?
A couple different scenarios I've seen.
Okay.
Sometimes the energy is used right on site to power the facilities that are part of the landfill operation.
Okay.
Sometimes they are sold to, or it's the methane gas itself is piped to generators to power a local industry that's nearby. Got it.
And in your case, in Indiana, what will happen to the energy that's created out of the waste stream?
The classic examples in Indiana is there's an asphalt plant that is using landfill gas to make asphalt.
Great.
And there is a General Motors plant that builds those tough Chevy trucks that many of us love. and they use that methane gas to power their boilers.
Hey, for our listeners out there, if you've got your iPad open or your laptop or your desktop, we're so honored today to have Steve Christman on, and Steve is the director of the Northeast Indiana Solid Waste Management District. Open up your laptop or your iPad and go to www.NISWMD.org and see all the great work that Steve and his colleagues are doing over in Northeast Indiana, leading the way to create waste to new resources. Steve, you're a very humble guy. You teach also, besides also being in management and being a director of Northeast Indiana Solid Waste Management District, you're a teacher. You on composting. Go back to that composting. Is this now taking the food stream that historically had gone into the landfill, and you're saying 100% zero landfill on food now through composting?
Well, in some programs,
okay.
We're not there yet that
okay.
I'm aware of in any of the programs because of the collection and handling challenge,
right?
As you might imagine.
Sure.
But in some parts of the country, we're definitely well on our way. Keep in mind, municipal solid waste management, I have always argued, is not a garbage problem. It's not a solid waste problem. Solid waste management is a materials handling problem. And after you're around it a few years, you begin to realize that. It's a matter of being able to pick material up and put it down and do something with it in between or as efficient as possible or the least amount of cost. Food waste, as you might imagine, John, creates some interesting challenges that some programs are getting really innovative and are effectively recovering substantial amounts of food waste in order to make compost. It's, however, only one component of most compost facilities because they handle a lot of yard waste, for example.
Right.
Yard waste being the brush, leaves, grass, that type of thing. Many of them will handle all the barn cleanings, from the horse tracks, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Or here in the Midwest, as you might imagine, from the dairy operations.
Sure.
So, and we make what's called a recipe. The feedstock coming into the compost facility makes up a recipe for us to build these long windrows, they're called, in order to cook the material down. So, as part of my involvement with the Solid Waste Association of North America, they offer a number of classes having to do with integrated solid waste management, by the way, anywhere from landfill operation to composting to household hazardous waste programs, to all those aspects of what we call integrated solid waste management.
And explain that. What's integrated solid waste management and going green really? How do they work hand in hand, and why is there a relationship between both of those terms?
Sure. Integrated solid waste management is basically it's an environmentally and economically systematic approach to handling solid waste. And by that I mean it combines all those technologies that we have, like source reduction even, as well as recycling, composting. You've heard of waste to energy,
sure,
energy facilities.
Sure.
Integrated solid waste management also includes collection, those transfer stations that I had talked to you about, and all those items we use, or technologies we use, including processing facilities, in order to conserve and recover those resources, or to dispose of what can't be recovered in an environmentally and economically sound manner. That's the science that I often refer to, or the science of solid waste management.
Got it.
So there may be a particular facility that's most appropriate for some communities, John, because of the size, because of the nature of the waste stream, and those types of considerations, but not necessarily appropriate for another community in another state. So what integrated solid waste management allows you to do is to, again, practice the science and fashion those programs and plans like you'll see on the district's website to suit those communities and those economic, social, geographic situations to handle what we refer to as the municipal solid waste stream. So SWANA has all these courses that cover those types of things, that train professionals in the field. And, of course, the composting course is one that I've been heavily involved in the past couple of years. It's a lot of fun to teach, and I do it, quite frankly, because I get to work with compost operators from all over North America. I get to learn a whole bunch of stuff.
Right, and bring the best practices back to Indiana.
Absolutely.
Underneath all the great work that you do, you manage all these amazing recycling programs: electronics, battery, fluorescent bulbs, compost, as you've already talked about. Also, the Sharps program, which we've had a show on Sharps with regards to syringes and things of that such, shoes, and also HHW, which is commonly known as household hazardous waste. Oil, paint, and all that kind of stuff. Talk a little bit about household hazardous waste, if you might, Steve, and talk about what the future of that waste stream looks like to you.
Household hazardous waste here in the Midwest accounts for roughly about 1% of the municipal solid waste stream, but as you might imagine, it can be extremely toxic,
right?
If mishandled. They're very popular with the people that we serve. But not only that, from a regulatory standpoint, these Subtitle D landfills that I keep referring to are required now to have waste screening programs. So the landfills don't want that particular material under current regulations.
Right.
So that's one of the primary drivers, as you might imagine, that pushes that material to programs like ours. So we're able to set up these recovery programs to direct that material here to the district, to where our contractor can safely and properly package them, and then, of course, recycle as much of it or recover the energy from it if possible. A lot of programs get started to handle the paint, for example, which is one of the largest components. About 85% actually of all the material we handle in our program is either latex or oil-based paint. They tend to just naturally grow then into other materials like electronics, fluorescent bulbs, and those types of things. So we were able to establish a permanent drop-off location here at our office shop complex, we call it. It's very popular. Folks love to. They come every Friday morning and bring those materials here to be safely recycled and or disposed of. Many districts, many entities across North America hold Tox Days, you may have heard of, or Tox Away Days. And the purpose of that is to capture that material or to give homeowners and, in some programs, small companies the opportunity to safely and properly recycle their household hazardous waste or small quantity hazardous materials. Tox Away Days are great things. However, they can be extremely expensive. Back to this concept of practicing the science of integrated solid waste management, I've been able to establish at least one drop-off location that's open every week for our customers, if you will. And by doing that, we've been able to cut the cost of that program in half on a per-ton basis.
Right.
And that's the great thing about the practice of integrated solid waste management, if you will, is to help, and that's why we say to economically and environmentally recover those resources, because, as you might imagine, it can get very, very expensive.
Steve, unfortunately, we're down to the last minute and a half or so. Do you have any words of wisdom based on your amazing career with regards to the youth out there that listen to our shows, both here in the United States and around the world? Because not only do we air on the Great Clear Channel radio network, but we get uploaded onto the Apple iTunes network after our show airs, and we have listeners from Shanghai to Singapore to Mumbai and Paris. Could you share a little bit of your words of wisdom with regards to environmental science and the young entrepreneurs and students that are listening in to the show as we get to sign off in the next couple of minutes?
Sure, be glad to. I've been privileged over the years to have and use a lot of college interns in our programs, and it's great to work with these bright, brilliant young minds that are coming on. And I want to encourage, the younger generation. Environmental science, to me, is the only place to be. How in the world these young interns study boring things like engineering or practice law or be a doctor or something? How could they possibly do such things when there's environmental science to practice? I mean, come on. Going green is not new.
Right.
For the young folks out there, go back a few generations and do your homework. Going green is something this great country of ours has always been able to do. And we're just revisiting that issue. And there's some great information out there online, and the younger folks that I work with are much better at it than even I am. And it's a good dose of common sense, John, is going green, I would also say. And so that's the thing to do, is look at that and buy carefully, recycle, do those things that help to take care of that material. And rather than waste it and bury it, let's recover it and reuse it, or let's make a new product out of it, or let's extract the energy from it. And so that's the mindset, and I think the youth has that even more so, and that's the good news, of course. So it's just part and parcel of what we need to do as we move into the future, and integrated solid waste management is going to do that for us. That's the science, that's the tool. And look at some of the exciting things that's happening as far as making fuel from some of our materials, and even more exciting is making compost. And we have T-shirts here locally that a lot of times I'll give to my students. It says, "Compost happens."
That's perfect. That is perfect.
As we're talking about going green, that's probably what I'd like to leave with you and the folks
Compost
listening.
happens.
But folks like me get terribly excited over that. But guys, I'm telling you, compost happens.
You know, Steve, you're always welcome back to our show. You're just wonderful, and we're just so thankful for your time today. For our listeners out there to see more of the great work that Steve and his colleagues are doing in Indiana, please go to www.NISWMD.org. Steve Christman, you are an inspirational sustainability leader and truly living proof that green is good.
Well, thanks, guys. What great fun. I enjoy it. We'll have to do it again sometime.